de vuelta. Gracias por estar ahí con nosotros y ahora con un panel súper interesante.
Thank you for being here. We're going to have here for an interesting panel on ethics and artificial intelligence. We're going to see how algorithms, AI, and how do they work. The moderator of the panel is going to be Johanna Caterina. She was part of a panel yesterday as keynote speaker. And a lot of students asked many questions and commended you for your presentation. Thank you very much. You're famous right now in this region. Now we have a panel with different geographies. We have people from Geneva, Kuwait, and Uruguay. We have somebody in Brazil, Cláudio Lucena, Jorge Vega Iracelay from Spain, Javier Ignacio García Fronti, just like me and Johanna in Argentina. Let's welcome you all. Without further ado, Johanna, I'll give you the floor. Over to you. Thank you very much. It's great to have you here. First and foremost, I would like to introduce the panel that speaks of artificial intelligence, algorithm, and our daily lives. It's undeniable to say that algorithms do not impact our daily lives and the application and the use of algorithms. We should think of the impact and on the Internet of Things and the uses of many devices that in a way gather and process personal data from us. Our lives are ruled by this digital identity created with this data processing and gathering that is embedded in our lives. So we are going to discuss how these algorithms impact our daily lives. What are the impacts from the legal standpoint, ethical point of view, and economic point of view? Without further ado, we have Cláudio Lucena, head of the International Officer from the University of Paraíba, Brazil. Cláudio, in connection with your research and the issues that you said in terms of biometrics, I would like to know your opinion so you can share it here with the rest of the students. What is the impact of algorithm on our daily lives? Thank you very much. We cannot hear Cláudio. The connection, where either he's mute. No, tampoco.
Felicitarlos de nuevo por la oportunidad, la tercera vez que estoy con ustedes en esta semana.
Thank you for giving me the chance. It's the third time that I'm here. More than at my university. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry, but the audio is not clear for translation, just like yesterday.
De estas becas de gobernanza de Internet de Latinoamérica. Y en este tema particularmente, Caterina, me acuerdo que tuvimos yo estoy trabajando con gobernanza, regulación, ya tenemos unos 4 años, en un proyecto con la Fundación para la Ciencia y la Tecnología en Portugal, conectada con el gobierno portugués. Y la primera vez que ponemos este tema en una gran sesión, fue en 2017, la Escuela de Gobernanza, Escuela Sur de Gobernanza de Internet en Río. Y ahí tratamos de gobernanza y algoritmos por primera vez en una sesión más amplia, abierta. Y es impresionante como este tema desde ahí hasta...
And it's great how this topic became significant in terms of technology, regulation, but we see further regulation. I'm sorry, but we cannot translate his audio.
Iniciativas globales de mapeo de regulación o gobernanza de algoritmos. Y esto significa por completo que el tema está en la agenda de todo el mundo. El tema definitivamente está en la agenda de todo el mundo. Y me parece particularmente adecuado, Caterina, que ustedes tengan planeado este panel para esta ya el día a día, ¿no? Porque ahí empezamos a nos afastar un poco de la ficción científica, del tema de sustitución de conciencia, de una gran sustitución de toda la especie humana por máquinas, que es un tema importante, relevante, filosóficamente interesante, ¿no? Viable. Hay investigación científica muy seria en este sentido. Nosotros tenemos un instituto que se llama The Future of Life Institute en la Universidad de Oxford, que tiene grants enormes para tratar de este momento de una, digamos, singularidad, en que una inteligencia humana sea superada en términos genéricos, entonces, pero no es el tema del día a día. Y no es lo que tenemos que discutir en estas iniciativas regulatorias y en el mapeamiento ahora. Así que me parece muy adecuado que estemos discutiendo la gran singularidad, sí es importante, pero ahora las pequeñas modalidades son más frecuentes, más presentes, están en nuestro día a día y demandan nuestra atención más inmediata en este momento. Así que el ambiente de discusión es perfecto. Muchísimas gracias, Juan, de nuevo.
Cláudio, un placer las reflexiones.
Cláudio, thank you for your excellent comments. I have a different vision on this, on the need of to approach this with commitment. In particular, because I said this in my keynote address presentation yesterday, artificial intelligence many times goes hand in hand with data ethics washing. We have connection problems. And this leads us to some fallacies because ethics has not been the objective of data protection forever. And in connection with the regulations, I'm sorry, but the audience is breaking up. And the assessment of these impacts, it is key to address specifically these sort of regulations and more comprehensive. We will give the floor to Jorge Vega Iracelay, technology expert in Spain. Jorge, it's a great pleasure to introduce you. He's been a keynote speaker. He has a PhD from Carlos III University of Madrid. And he's going to deal with the decision-making process and regulation of GDPR of the European Union and to connect it with our daily lives. Jorge, word to you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Johanna. It's a pleasure to find you here and to speak together with the rest of the panelists. Thank you, Oscar, Olga, and Jen, for having invited me. I'm one of the founders of this school, working in Microsoft and working in the academic sector. It's a pleasure to be once again here. I'm doing my thesis revolving around algorithms and the impact, the rights and regulations. And I believe it's a thesis or a dissertation that I will never finish, because hundreds and hundreds of papers are produced every single day in Europe on this issue.
I think that it's good to have these kind of discussions within the governance forum, because we're going to discuss governance, AI, algorithms. So we need to address this topic carefully. We have an audience of experts, of people that sometimes may have to make decisions. So AI is not science fiction. It already exists, and algorithms are not like witchcraft or something that is following us and is always negative. It's not only Mark Zuckerberg that is using it. It exists, and it's something that it's been going on for a while. And following that idea, I think that we need to ask ourselves some questions. How these algorithms work, what is the impact they have in our lives, if regulations are enough, if we need to protect personal data, following those data, and we need to find a balance, because somehow we also need to ask developers or those using these algorithms to follow ethics principles and to be responsible, transparent, as the regulation demands in Europe. I have only a few minutes and a lot of content, so I'm going to be brief. Yuval Harari, that is a person that I follow because I really like his opinions on technology and the impact it has on society. He was saying that AI is one of the big threats of this century. Artificial intelligence and also the super intelligence that may develop a different kind of intelligence. We have now the opportunity to avoid our lives being guided by algorithms. Next one, please. Data. I think that data are important to understand the context. In my career, I have always liked to understand concepts and contexts, because nowadays we have developed 40 zettabytes. To give you an idea, 1 zettabyte is the same as 17,000 iPhones with 64 gigabytes of memory. So imagine the numbers. It's incredible the amount of data that we have developed so far, the amount of time that we spend using different apps and social networks, and the different algorithms that process information about us are behind those apps and networks. Next one. What is this? The previous one, please. What we were seeing in the previous slide, it's one of the many algorithms that Facebook has. We know that Facebook processes what we do in social networks, our likes, what we read, what we share, and they profile us to apply direct marketing. And those are the data that they use to keep their business going. So they have a more efficient direct marketing that they may have if they would use a different kind of marketing that affects our privacy. Of course, this is not a formula, but it's an image to show you what an algorithm may look like. What are the news feeds? And they, according to our profile, decide which are the news that we are going to receive.
This at least gives us a partial view of reality. What we're going to see, those news that Facebook does based on an algorithm and a profiling of my likes and affinities, the news that I'm going to see. So it's a very partial view of the world. Later, this could be a daily live scene in any country. Devices that are interconnected, wireless devices, sensors, body sensors, temperature sensors that are using COVID-19, and algorithms, equations that are processing this information and that are gathering the information, and they're building upon profiles, or what is worse, is that they're omnipresent, silently controlling people. We're not aware of the existence of how our data is being protected and some of the decisions that are automated that are made in line with this data. What are the examples? Loans that are being asked, or loan requests in banks. Not only they process this data on my creditworthiness, but the body temperature, the tone of voice, my accent, inflection. So the decision to give me the loan or not is not being done objectively or with credible parameters, and I have no control. 70% of the roadmaps in the United States is done through algorithms, human resources. One may see the advantage that not algorithms are bad. Many of the CVs couldn't get through human beings because of capacity. Because what allows for in artificial intelligence is to treat large volumes of data and to be scalable at an unthinkable rate. That was inconceivable 10 years ago. Next slide. I'm sure that we connect to and we log in, we know identities, we have a password, and an ID. But we don't know what our profile is. This is our profile that any social media can do on my preferences, my likes and interests, and what they sell to advertisers. So with their direct marketing campaigns, they can reach more effectively to sell those products in connection with my likes. So this is a very good channel. It may seem more effective in terms of marketing, corporate marketing. The problem is when we are not aware of this profile, or when there are automatic decisions that are being made without human control, or when the final decisions that I get a certain alert or warning because of a certain affinity. For example, if I am gay, I'm being discriminated. This is a person in an airport in line with the algorithm. They determined that he was dangerous and he constituted a threat of terrorism. He was detained. The algorithm consider that probably he looked for a war game for his children, or that he had kinship with Muslims. So based on these considerations, they determined that he was a threat, a security threat for the airport. And there are countless examples where decisions are made on human beings that they have legal relevance, that it could imply discrimination, or decisions that are important without knowing how these algorithms go. And I would like to know what is the incumbent regulation and how can we face them in the future?
So what are we focusing on? When we talk about data protection in Europe, there are a lot of initiatives and concerns in the European Union. As you know, there's a white paper about, a white book about AI. This is the previous step in order to legislate on the topic.
The right of data protection was thought to protect individuals before the intervention of the state, but not because of algorithm intervention. In most of the cases, this is administered by private agencies. And the privacy law right, or the data protection right, is protecting the individual law, not the metadata, not the results of algorithm, then the processing this data, and that ends up with an inference on a set of data that make up your life. And that is a problem that we have with the incumbent legislation that is thought to protect individual data and for state intervention. Yeah, there are rights under the new regulation. For example, I may oppose to automated profiling information decision. However, the priority is placed upon the holder of data and preventing little those that exploit that algorithm from exploiting or from using it, or artificial intelligence. Principle of transparency, explicability. It has to do with transparency, but the owner of the right and those that exercise their rights for example, that person needs to be aware of what sort of treatment or how the data is being treated. What is the logical rationale where decisions or whereby decisions are going to be made. There's literature that speaks of reasonable inferences that based on the patterns and the architecture and the code tree, if they are making the right decision, what is the protection that that it confers me through the law. To draw a conclusion in the era of big data, it may seem inconsistent to think of data protection. The principle of minimization. Algorithm analytics require data, so it's very difficult to build upon a legal principle like the minimization of data in the era of big data, because the business model intends on having a larger volume of data at faster rates. And a footnote when we deal with governance, because the markets or the countries where regulation is demanding in terms of privacy of information and the analytics of data and the responsibility of developers, I am sure this struggle for the supremacy, like AI or the intensive use of data, they're going to be led in China when there's slight data protection and not that demanding like in Europe or in other countries in Latin America. That's why the European Union basically realize that, and that fragments the internet. And it's not the one that was conceived years ago that was unfragmented, but right now we're going to see larger fragmentation of data. Solution lies in changing some of the principles of the regulation, at least in Europe, that determines this sort of phenomenon with greater participation of stakeholders, with a well-balanced view that is prudent or decent, because there are some algorithms that are good and they save lives. There are some algorithms that could be life-changing in terms of agriculture. They could measure temperature, improve or enhance crops and plants. If we need to analyze this with perspective, and those that are going to report these decisions are going to enjoy this. And let me give you some context or conclusions and the way to conceive algorithms. We cannot solve problems in a one-size-fits-all solution as we originally did in the past. Thank you, and I would gladly take your questions.
Great presentation, Jorge. According to the different problems that there were in personal data protection regulation, this is an important issue. When both players, the private sector and the public sector, should play a role here. We shouldn't focus on who is using this personal data more, the public or the private sector, but more to think about the idea maybe of only the private sector gathering personal data. Actually, the data market involves both parties. And the focus on this system is not on analytical results of data processing. Here in Argentina, I believe that we have already started the wrong way with all the personal data regulation when we identify data as personal information, when information means more than one data, so we are not protecting from the regulatory point of view individual data, so we don't know the value of registries. And we have noticed that with the analytical capacities growing exponentially, with these new algorithms that work as a black box, and with results that we can change, not only through formulas. So I think that your presentation was very interesting, Jorge. It was really useful for all of us. And now I'm going to give the floor to the third speaker, Javier Ignacio Fronti. Javier, it's a pleasure to have you here. He's the alternate director of the IADCOM Institute in Argentina, and he's going to talk about the transformation process of individuals into data citizens. You have the floor, Javier. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the organization for inviting me. Unlike Jorge and Cláudio, this is the first time that I participate in this school, so I would like to thank Olga and Johanna. I would like to thank you as a moderator. It's a great pleasure to be part of this panel with Cláudio and Jorge. Since I am a researcher, I work for the University of Buenos Aires, for the IADCOM, in the School of Business of the university. I work with everything that has to do with financial risks and data. Specifically, our research center is focusing on data management in different organizations. This is different from a focus maybe on other areas. We are focusing on the area of data in organizations. First of all, I would like to mention, as Jorge also said, that there are some things that I consider important. I was listening to Cláudio about AI processing for different topics such as, for example, credit risk management. This is something that we have been working for a while. I teach in the actuary career in the university, and it's something that we work when students are in the second year. They have already seen everything about algorithms. We start talking about how to articulate human beings and AI, and how this articulation is going to work, because AI is not only a machine, there's a human being behind it, and there's a concrete interaction. So as regards credit risk, we are seeing different artificial models, and we are seeing how to articulate them with human beings and how to, from the point of view of management processes, which would be the best practices so that we can achieve some kind of interaction in which they can both learn. And I also think it's important to mention, as Jorge was saying, I was focusing on the idea that Jorge was showing of Facebook and the algorithms. That's what we use for derivatives market. I think that there's a market for buying and selling future expectations, and that future expectation market is similar to a derivatives market. And what you buy and sell are future expectations. So also regarding the regulations, these algorithms that Jorge was mentioning, I think that it's interesting to see the regulation of algorithms through algorithms. If we focus a little bit on the presentation, what we are seeing is that from the private sector point of view, as Johanna was saying, there are companies that exploit big data, and it is measured in their balance. And this concept that is actually used in the public and private sector, this data technology to focus on patterns is opposed to a topic that has been in our society for a while, for many decades actually. There are no indifferent data that would be part of a thing, according to a philosopher. So what he's saying is that actually we feel or we believe that something is part of a thing because we have the analytical capacity of analyzing patterns. So the human mind to make decisions is going to face this fact that we have a lot of data, so there are patterns that should be opposing to this analytical capacity. So from this, we need to focus on the relationship between the public sector and data. What they try to do is to give society something through using data, but they ask about how data are part of this. We are going to be working on this presentation on data policy, because what we see is that there's the risk that data themselves, and as such, and not the problems of people, are the ones that are going to bring about questions that are going to be answered by public policies. So the idea is to achieve this data to allow kind of an inclusive policy. So we are focusing more on the person and not the sector itself. And we need to think which is going to be the transformation process of this individual, and to transform it into a data citizen that would allow a stronger policy. So why are we saying this? Because we listen to many politicians in our country talking about digital citizenship, that is the possibility of participating online in social processes. We think that that is not understanding the real impact and not including the key factor that is the citizen. We talk about digital citizenship, but we are talking about getting it online, doing some tasks that before we did face-to-face. So what we are saying is that although it is important that this understanding this new citizenship has to do with increasing involvement, participation, security, privacy, protecting data, enhancing or improving access to internet. But what we need to say is that this political subjectivity needs something more than all this, not to be limited. So we are working on a proposal that has to do with any attempts to be to work on this digital citizen should work a little bit on the citizen itself, in our particular case in Argentina, to the history, and it's going to be different than what Jorge was saying, that is going to be, for example, in China. And in the second place, this digital citizens need to work together. And we are going to use the idea of a French philosopher, Latour, that has to do with collective roles, and that individuals are created through different digital interactions, and their digital footprints are going to organize their activities. When we leave data in the networks, our profile, our cell phones are going to give us a profile. For example, if I didn't have all the steps that I need today in the health app, then I'm going to continue walking. So this information that we have in the platforms later on is going to come back, and it's going to continue profiling the individual. So to wrap up, what we should ask is, we actually should understand the transformation process of these individuals into data citizens so that they can work and we can continue working in the future. We have focused on some public policy concrete situations, and we have defined an umbrella that is like a platform that we have here that has to do with data participation governance, and it is connected to the governance framework that you all know, and it has a lot of support from the European vision. So from data governance, we have done some analysis, and as Jorge was saying, in the case of Argentina, metadata, it is forbidden to keep, for example, a video. In the case of the city of Buenos Aires, the government of Buenos Aires, to keep the video for a while, but it doesn't talk about metadata and the patterns that were developed through that. Thank you, and thank you, Johanna.
Javier, always a pleasure. Very interesting to consider these stories and these issues, because this crisis culture aspect, when we have data protection and the digital citizenry aspect, is important to understand the peculiarities. So this is the idea, to rethink and to reshape the role of citizenship or citizenry, to have the self-governance in data. I got many questions. Since we need to close the panel, I'm going to try to summarize them, combining all questions in one. Just like what Cláudio, Jorge, and Javier said. And you may conclude with reflections in 2 minutes. The question is, if we have some light at the end of the tunnel, approaching privacy, are there any expectations in data protection, and by introducing these techniques that we all said that are risky? And if AI can become the new internet language for the future. Cláudio, all yours. It's the first time that I share this panel with Javier. And I just sent Olga a book that was published last year that is called AI and the Well-Being in Latin America. And multi-stakeholderism is the only approach possible to manage these sort of issues, for which 19th and 20th century tools are not enough. Especially, we address the need to involve young people. Without any multisectorial model, they don't have any space or discussion forum. I just share it with Olga, since we have an open source. Olga is always opening spaces, bridges, and horizons for me. There's a sequence of the round table, 3C of the digital roadmap, presented by the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, responsible for making adjustments to discuss from the UN point of view regulatory initiatives of AI. Faced with this process, we have Dani, that is a researcher in Asia, that is working together with the UN Secretariat. That's why I'm making and fine-tuning some of the aspects. Because the traditional players know how the technology behaves. The technology is included in our daily lives. Now, the major concern is to see how they behave and what the impact of technology is in all environments. Yeah, well, depending on the pace, because of cultural language barriers or economic barriers as well. So what we need to have is people or stakeholders in these spaces and to communicate this information so we could have a global dialogue in a multi-sectorial nature where we all share these important issues. To conclude, let me tell you that we see, apart from that, we see the only possible light at the end of the tunnel. If we speak of state intervention, we're discussing the best opportunities to have society to increase or enhance information technology, the health sector, and the internet. If we do it carefully with participation and with regulation, I believe this is the only way. There are two ways. Either we choose AI to solve this, the most serious of societies that are inequality and corruption for Latin America. Thank you, Cláudio. It's been a pleasure listening to you. Jorge, Javier, 1 minute. To draw some conclusions, I will give the floor to our Tulva. We have expectations. I am hopeful and anxious at the same time. In the sense that there's an urgency sense. I like what Cláudio said, that this is a very complex problem where to be solved by a single sector. We need to hear all voices, especially those from young people, fresh voices, because the privacy right has evolved. Europeans are reinterpreting this right in line with guidelines or parameters or requirements that are not of the citizenry. Customer experience, customer satisfaction, the use of social media, direct marketing, and profiling is a good experience in most of the cases. So we want to hear those voices and not to fall victims of this demonization or demonizing the idea that algorithms are tyrants, dark, and we need to advocate data protection and go against them. So this is very important. This is crucial. Now, we would like to discuss fundamental things like international cooperation. I just said that artificial intelligence requires a lot of data. If they had been available to fight COVID-19, I'm sure we would have been in a different situation. However, there are no international mechanism to share this data compulsory and to share and to process it all together and to run the algorithms that are necessary in order to reach conclusions. The pandemic poses new problems to work on and to overcome. And finally, rights are not absolute rights. We need to construe them functionally. If it took 6 months to have a tracking or tracing application, it's because data privacy is important. So they may be right. Javier? I would like to acknowledge Cláudio and Jorge for their conclusions. Picking up on what Jorge was saying in Latin America, we understand data privacy that we see in the United States and in Europe. That is a vision where everything seems to be solved. However, Latin America is different. We have social inclusion issues. Public policy needs to requires a tool set. Aradi's vision on privacy is more liberal. which is good for the first world, where everything seems to work out. However, in Latin America, as we said in our presentations, we need to seek or pursue a more inclusive democratic policy, as Jorge and Cláudio say, including the stakeholders, the young people. Most of them are poor, they need to be heard, to be included in a democratic fashion in this new data protection policy. Javier, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Olga, over to you. Thank you. Great. I would like to draw some conclusions. The only light at the end of the tunnel, anxiety, Jorge's anxiety, and paying attention also. Paying attention to what is going on with the developments or with regulation making, policy making. This is a new field, and I would like to make a comment on what you said. I recommend following Johanna. I'm sure Johanna is organizing many virtual courses, right? Yes. For everybody in Latin America, she's a lawyer that highly specializes in data privacy, knows about AI, intellectual property, ethics. My expectations are with the young people because we were young once in the history. And let me borrow this from Cláudia. I feel young, even though I'm not that young. And we need to tap into the young people because those are the ones that are going to take control or take over this. So Johanna represents everybody that is young. She's younger than us. It's not that we're not young. And I would like to thank Javier for bringing the opinion from the School of Buenos Aires, the School of Economics. We were going to do the in-person conference there. We had hired a hotel, the catering for people, the coffee break. But it's a great pleasure to have you here together with other colleagues from the University of Buenos Aires. Cláudio is the example, or the epitome of what we can create with the Southern School of Internet Governance, with networking. He's a great researcher. And having a coffee with me in Geneva. Join this family, the family of Internet Governance. Thank you for being here. Jorge for me is a very dear person to me. You know that it takes time, it costs money, and efforts needs to be made. When you cannot tell a story, things will not be believable. And when we had this idea at the very beginning in 2008 and 9, it was working for a large corporation in Buenos Aires. Nobody approved any budgeting or funding at that time. He listened to us. He says, I don't know how, but we're going to help you. And he was the first one to help us with a sponsorship from his company at that time. It was very valuable at that time. I really appreciate it. It was the first sponsorship. And that is brave enough because sometimes, one has to support this, an event or sponsor an event, whether or not knowing that they don't know if it's going to be good or bad. And as Jorge said, he's from the very beginning helping us. He's living in Spain right now. Johanna and Adrian say hi. Really appreciate all the effort made. And let me reiterate, virtual events are not cheap or simple. If you think so, it's because you haven't done it. So thank you for being punctual. Thank you for your interesting presentations. And let's see if we can continue with the next keynote. Greetings from Buenos Aires. Be healthy, stay safe, and probably we can gather next time in the near future in an in-person event. Thank you. Thank God it's Friday. Have a nice weekend.
Un abrazo a mi querida Argentina.
Thank you.
Gracias, Johanna. Saludos a todos. Un placer.
Saludos.
We'll break, and in a few minutes we'll resume with the session with Laura Maresca, who is the director for Educar, with her keynote speech.